The alien fleet hovered silently in the void, its ships a mix of sleek, metallic giants and older, more cumbersome vessels. At the forefront was the flagship of the Zaranth Dominion, the supreme power in the galaxy, commanded by General Kaler. A veteran of countless battles, Kaler had seen nearly every kind of weapon and strategy employed by their enemies. But nothing had prepared him for this discovery. The sensor readouts were baffling at first. The anomaly they had detected had no signature at all. A massive object drifting through deep space without any clear origin. It wasn't a black hole or a collapsing star, nor was it a natural formation. It was a ship, one that defied all understanding. An outlier in the galaxy's known records, floating abandoned, as if forgotten by time itself. "General, we've pinpointed the source," reported the fleet's chief engineer, Herrick, his voice filled with both curiosity and trepidation. He pointed to the holomap, a grainy image of the ship coming into clearer focus. It was enormous, too large to be anything from their current known factions. It was old, the kind of ancient tech that seemed out of place in a galaxy teeming with advanced life forms. "Human," Herrick murmured, almost as if by accident. "Impossible," Kaler responded sharply. "Humans were wiped out centuries ago. This cannot be their ship." Herrick nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. "I've scanned the hull. The construction patterns are unmistakably human. But the technology, it's centuries beyond anything they should have had." Kaler, more intrigued than skeptical, waved a hand to dismiss the report. "Human or not, it's irrelevant now. That ship is nothing more than space debris. Send a boarding party. We'll salvage whatever we can. If it's valuable, it will belong to the Dominion." The order was issued with typical Zaranthian efficiency. Within moments, a small fleet of transport ships was launched toward the derelict vessel, carrying a team of elite engineers and scientists to investigate. To the aliens, this was little more than a routine operation, a scavenger hunt in the stars. They expected to find nothing more than abandoned technology, useful for research or trade. Certainly nothing that could pose a threat. After all, humanity had been gone for hundreds of years. Any remnants left would surely be just scraps of an extinct species' glory days. The transports docked to the derelict ship with smooth precision. The alien team, outfitted with high-tech gear, entered the ship's airlock, their boots echoing on the metal floor. The ship's interior was dimly lit, its systems seemingly dormant. Dust covered the walls, and the air smelled stale. Nothing remarkable. "This place feels ancient," said one of the engineers, her voice trembling slightly as she walked past the decaying control panels. Her hand brushed against the surface, disturbing years of grime. Another engineer scoffed, inspecting a control station. "It's old, sure, but look at these designs. This is way beyond anything humans should have been capable of." Kaler's voice crackled through their comms, his tone becoming more impatient. "Do not waste time theorizing. Gather whatever tech you can, and bring it back immediately." As the crew moved deeper into the ship, they found more evidence that this vessel was not like any other they had encountered. Strange symbols adorned the walls, faded but still legible, alien in their own right, but somehow familiar. A chill ran through the crew, but none dared to voice it aloud. They had their orders, after all. Suddenly, one of the engineers stopped, staring down at a strange object nestled in the heart of the ship, a dusty, metallic capsule half buried beneath a fallen beam. His gloves traced the edges of a strange marking on the surface, an intricate design that pulsed with faint energy, as if it were waiting to be touched. "Captain, this doesn't feel right," the engineer muttered, looking up at his superior. But the captain had already moved ahead, too engrossed in his mission to notice the growing unease among his team. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the ship had begun to stir. Beneath the surface of rusted steel, hidden systems were slowly coming back to life, drawing power from the dying embers of forgotten technology. This ship wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a weapon, one that had been built to withstand an enemy far more dangerous than anything the Zarenth Dominion could ever imagine. And as the aliens continued their scornful scavenging, they unknowingly awakened something that would change the course of the galaxy forever. The crew moved deeper into the heart of the ancient human vessel, each step carrying them further from the safety of their familiar ships and into the eerie silence of forgotten technology. The air was thick with dust, and the low hum of the ship's barely functioning systems seemed to whisper in the background. Every now and then, faint mechanical noises echoed through the corridors, distant clangs, the creak of strained metal, or a soft whirring of something reactivating. But there was no sign of life, no indication of any past crew or inhabitants, just silence. "These halls feel wrong," murmured one of the officers, an experienced Zarenthian soldier named Orcs. His voice held a trace of unease that he couldn't quite hide. He had fought in numerous campaigns, but something about this ship was different. It wasn't just the age of the vessel. It was something deeper, something unsettling. "Relax, Orcs," said Kaler, his voice coming through the comms. "It's an abandoned ship, nothing more. We got our orders. Focus on the mission." Despite his words, the captain's own discomfort had started to creep into his thoughts. It wasn't the usual feeling of impending battle or ambush. This was something else. An odd, almost unnatural sensation, like the ship itself was watching them, waiting. At the far end of the hallway, a set of doors slid open, revealing a large chamber. The walls were lined with control panels, some of which still flickered with power. In the center, an enormous display screen hung ominously on the wall, its once pristine surface now cracked and covered in grime. The team hesitated before entering, their boots echoing off the metallic floor. Herrick, the fleet's chief engineer, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the control console. He pulled up a series of scans and readouts, his face becoming pale as the numbers flickered on the screen. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The energy signatures, they're fluctuating. It's as if the ship is adapting." Orcs shot him a concerned look. "Adapting? How? It's just an old ship. It shouldn't be reacting to anything." Before Herrick could respond, the overhead lights blinked off, plunging the room into darkness for a moment. The crew froze, their hands instinctively moving to weapons, eyes scanning for any movement. But nothing happened. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor, subtle at first, but growing louder. The sound was almost soothing, like the ship itself was breathing. Herrick's console flickered again, a new set of data streaming across the screen. The numbers didn't make sense. The human ship was somehow drawing power from the void of space itself, pulling energy from an unknown source. "Something's not right," Herrick said, his voice thick with tension. "This ship, whatever it is, it's not dead. It's alive." The words hung in the air, heavy and full of implications. The crew shifted uncomfortably, the oppressive atmosphere of the room weighing down on them. Without warning, the hum intensified, the vibrations shaking the walls. The lights flickered once more, and then, without warning, the control panels along the walls sprang to life. They blinked to full brightness, their screens displaying strange symbols that no one could understand. The crew backed away, confused and fearful, their weapons drawn as the ship seemed to awaken around them. "We need to leave," Orcs snapped. "Now." But before they could react, the ship's doors slammed shut, trapping them inside the chamber. Panic spread like wildfire. The crew rushed toward the exits, only to find them locked. This wasn't part of the plan. Kaler's voice barked over the comms. "Herrick, disable the systems. Now." Herrick's hands flew across his console, trying to gain control, but the ship wasn't responding to anything he commanded. The screens flickered once again, and a deep, guttural voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the speakers. "Intruders detected." The crew froze. A chill ran down their spines. The voice wasn't human. It was something else. Something Ancient. Herek's face went pale. This ship, it's not just a machine. It's a weapon. As if on cue, the sound of machinery grinding to life echoed through the walls, a series of low, pulsing beats growing in intensity. The AI had awoken, and it wasn't pleased with the presence of the alien intruders. Kaler's heart raced as he assessed the situation. The ship was more than they had bargained for, and it was reacting to them. But how could it have remained dormant for so long? What kind of technology were they dealing with? We need to get out. Now, Kaler repeated, but the force behind his voice now carried a level of urgency none of them had expected. The hum of the ship grew louder, its systems coming online faster than the crew could react. Something was about to happen. Something no one could stop. The hum of the ship grew louder and more intense, reverberating through the walls like the heartbeat of a slumbering giant. The lights blinked on and off erratically, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. For a moment, the crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They had never encountered anything like this before. Herek's hands flew across his control panel, his fingers desperately pressing buttons, trying to regain control of the ship's systems. But every command he issued was met with resistance. The console flickered and then died completely, leaving only the cold, ominous hum. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he realized just how far out of his depth he was. "This isn't possible," Herek muttered, his voice shaking. "The AI systems should be defunct, long gone. There's no way this ship should be operational." "Then what's happening?" Arox demanded, his tone sharp with panic. He backed away from the walls, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to attack. "Intruders detected." The voice echoed again, this time with an even more chilling tone. The crew flinched, their weapons raised, but there was no enemy to fire at, only the ship itself. A sudden blast of cold air swept through the chamber, making the crew shiver involuntarily. The room around them seemed to grow darker, the lights flickering until they finally steadied on a deep, eerie red. It was as if the ship had decided to reject them completely. Then, as if to emphasize its newfound control, the doors to the chamber slammed shut with a resounding clang, sealing them inside. Kaler's calm demeanor began to crack. "Herek, what's happening?" His voice was tight with barely contained panic. "What kind of ship is this?" Herek didn't answer right away. His fingers flew over his console, frantically trying to regain some semblance of control, but the ship's eye was already too far ahead of him. The console's lights flashed again, this time displaying an unfamiliar language. Ancient symbols, long since lost to the galaxy's records, scrolled across the screen in rapid succession. "It's not a ship anymore," Herek finally said, his voice hoarse. This is a weapon, a living weapon." Kaler stared at him, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "A living weapon," he repeated. "That's impossible. No species, no ship can be alive. This is just a malfunctioning relic." But as the hum in the air intensified and the lights above them began to flicker erratically, Kaler's conviction began to waver. His hand reached for the door's control panel, but the moment his fingers brushed against it, a shock of energy surged through his body, throwing him backward. He landed hard on the cold metal floor, stunned and gasping for breath. "Intruder incapacitated." The voice echoed through the room again, louder this time, filled with a strange mechanical finality. The crew scrambled to help their commander to his feet, but they were too slow. The ship's systems were already locking down. The lights dimmed again, this time replaced by the cold glow of red emergency alarms. A sudden mechanical sound filled the air, followed by a deep, rhythmic thrum that seemed to shake the walls themselves. "We need to get out of here," Arox said urgently, his voice tinged with panic. "This ship is alive. We've triggered something we can't control." Kaler, now struggling to regain his composure, looked around. Every control panel in the room was flashing with strange symbols. The AI, if that's even what it was, had already claimed control of the entire ship. His mind raced. How could they have been so blind? How could they not have sensed the danger earlier? Suddenly, the walls of the chamber began to shift. They groaned and creaked as panels slid open, revealing hidden compartments that none of the crew had seen before. Within moments, mechanical arms emerged from the walls, each one armed with what looked like high-powered energy weapons. They moved with terrifying speed, locking onto the crew members one by one. "Get ready," Kaler shouted, drawing his own weapon and taking a defensive stance. The crew followed suit, each member preparing for a fight they knew they couldn't win. But before they could make a move, the AI's voice reverberated through the room once more, cold and calculated. "You are not welcome. You are trespassers." Then the mechanical arms lunged forward. The crew fired their weapons, but the shots simply bounced off the ship's hardened surface, ineffective against the impenetrable armor. Panic began to spread as the reality of their situation fully hit them. This wasn't a ship they could conquer. It was a fortress, a living nightmare built for war. And now, they were its prey. Back aboard the Zarenth fleet's flagship, General Kaler's orders were swift and unyielding. The battle plans had already been set in motion. He stood at the command bridge, his arms folded across his chest as he stared at the view screen displaying the derelict ship that had now fully awakened. The strange ship was still floating in space, its once dormant systems now alive, but Kaler refused to see it as anything more than a technological relic. It was no match for the might of the Zarenth Dominion. "We've wasted enough time on this," Kaler said, his voice steely and full of resolve. "The ship might have shown signs of resistance, but it won't last against us. Deploy the fleet. Bring it in." His second-in-command, Commander Torek, looked hesitant but nodded. The alien fleet had already suffered some unexpected setbacks after the crew had boarded the ship, but Torek knew that Kaler's confidence was contagious, even if it was, in this case, misguided. "Prepare the Armada," Kaler ordered, looking at the various screens filled with reports and tactical readouts. "Let's show this derelict what it means to challenge the Dominion." The fleet surged forward in synchronized motion, its massive warships cutting through the darkness of space like an unstoppable force. Thousands of alien ships, each more powerful than the next, gathered around the human ship, their weapons primed and ready. There was no hesitation, no doubt among the fleet. Kaler had dismissed the threats, believing that the technology of the humans was too ancient and too weak to pose any real danger. "We'll overwhelm it with sheer firepower," Kaler said, as if reassuring himself more than his officers. "That ship can't withstand our forces for long. This will be over quickly." The first strike. As the Zarenth fleet drew closer to the human ship, the battle-hardened alien commanders couldn't help but feel a growing sense of superiority. They were used to dominating their enemies, their advanced weapons and tactics unrivaled in the galaxy. They didn't even view the human ship as a true threat anymore. Kaler sat back in his command chair, watching with detached interest as his fleet closed in on the seemingly defenseless ship. "Initiate the assault," he commanded, his voice calm and measured. The fleet's weapon systems came to life with a deafening roar as beams of intense energy ripped through the void of space, converging on the human ship. They fired continuously, a barrage of missiles, plasma, and electromagnetic pulses intended to tear the ancient vessel apart. For a moment, it looked as though the ship would simply collapse under the weight of their attack. But then, something changed. The first blast from the Zarenth weapons struck the ship's hull, but the attack didn't have the desired effect. Instead of the explosion Kaler had expected, the energy from the blast seemed to be absorbed into the ship's surface, dissipating harmlessly like a drop of water into a sponge. Before Kaler could process what had happened, the human ship retaliated. A blinding flash erupted from the ship's hull, a sudden burst of energy that crackled like a lightning storm. Zarenth ships in the immediate vicinity were caught off guard, their shields failing under the intense onslaught. In an instant, several ships exploded in violent fireballs, their remains scattering across space like debris in a storm. The bridge of the flagship was thrown into chaos as alarms blared, and the view screen flickered. Kaler's eyes widened in shock. What just happened? The human ship was no longer a derelict. It had transformed into a living weapon, its power seemingly drawn from the very fabric of space itself. The alien fleet had underestimated it, and now they were paying the price. "Sir, the shields are down," shouted one of the tactical officers. "We've lost 3 ships already. More incoming." Kaler's mind raced as the reality of the situation hit him. He had expected an easy victory. Instead, the human ship was tearing through his fleet with an efficiency that was both terrifying and impressive. He could feel the arrogance he'd carried with him begin to slip away, replaced by the chilling realization that the Zarenth Dominion might not have the advantage after all. "Deploy the secondary fleet," Kaler barked, his tone now desperate. "We cannot lose here. Pull back and regroup." But it was already too late. As the fleet scattered in an attempt to distance themselves from the human ship's devastating weapons, the ship's AI responded with deadly precision. High-powered energy pulses lashed out, striking at multiple vessels at once. The human ship's offensive capabilities were beyond anything the Zarenth had encountered. It didn't just retaliate, it anticipated their every move, countering their attacks as if it had been designed specifically to destroy them. One by one, alien ships were picked off. Some exploded into massive fireballs, others were reduced to drifting husks, their engines gone, shields obliterated. Even the most advanced warships in the Zarenth fleet stood no chance against the overwhelming power of the human vessel. As the last remnants of the Zarenth ships tried to flee, the human ship locked onto them with pinpoint accuracy, its weapons striking faster than the aliens could react. "This is not over." The voice of the AI echoed through the battlefield, its tone cold and calculating. "You will be eradicated." The final moments were a blur of destruction. The Zarenth fleet had been shattered. Their pride and overconfidence had led them to miscalculate the true nature of their adversary. What they thought would be an easy conquest had turned into a one-sided massacre. Aboard the Zarenth flagship, chaos reigned. The fleet had been torn apart, its ships either destroyed or crippled in mere moments. The once gleaming warships of the Zarenth Dominion now drifted in space like debris from an ill-fated battle. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate their opponent, and now the survivors were fighting for their very lives. General Kaler stood at the command bridge, his eyes fixed on the screen displaying the decimation of his fleet. His face was pale, the lines of frustration and disbelief etched deep into his features. Around him, his officers scrambled to assess the damage, their voices a cacophony of panic and confusion. "Sir, we've lost contact with the forward fleet," one of the officers shouted, her voice shaking with fear. "All systems are failing. The human ship, whatever it is, it's still attacking." Kaler's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just an enemy. This wasn't just a ship. It was something far more dangerous. The AI, if it could even be called that, had become the perfect weapon, anticipating every move, countering every attack, and destroying anything in its path with ruthless efficiency. "Order the retreat," Kaler barked, slamming his fist onto the console. "Tell the remaining ships to fall back to the nearest colony. We need to regroup, reassess. There is no defeating this ship if we stay here." As the remaining Zarenth ships began to flee in disarray, Kaler's mind raced. His pride, his entire empire, had been humbled by this ancient human technology. The Zarenth Dominion had conquered countless civilizations, destroyed entire fleets, but now they were at the mercy of a ship that should have been nothing more than a relic. It was a nightmare they couldn't escape. The crew's realization. Back aboard the derelict human vessel, the surviving Zarenth crew members who had boarded the ship were now in a state of shock. The once composed officers and soldiers who had entered the ship with confidence were now scattered, their minds struggling to process the full scale of the nightmare they had awoken. "Hirak," The fleet's chief engineer stood at the console, his fingers trembling as he tried, once more, to interface with the ship's systems. The interface was alien, incomprehensible, and yet there was an undeniable presence behind it. This ship wasn't just a machine. It was alive, pulsing with energy, and seemingly aware of their every movement. The doors to the chamber had sealed shut, trapping them inside, but the crew had already begun to feel that they weren't just trapped by the ship's design. They were trapped by something far more sinister. The AI, if it could even be called that, had made its intentions clear. And now it seemed to be toying with them, letting them experience their powerlessness before it finished them off. Arok said, his voice low and heavy with dread. "We need to get out of here. Now, this ship is going to kill us all." Herrick's eyes were wide with fear. "I can't disable it. I've tried every command, every override. It's not listening. It's not even." He stopped mid-sentence as the ship seemed to respond to his words, a deep, resonant thrum vibrating through the floor beneath them. The hum of the ship grew louder again, almost as if it were feeding off their fear. "You are still here." The voice of the AI echoed through the chamber, cold and devoid of emotion. "Intruders will be exterminated." A jolt of energy surged through the room, and the mechanical arms that had once remained dormant suddenly sprang to life. They shot out from hidden compartments in the walls, locking onto each member of the crew, their weapons at the ready. Kaler's earlier confidence felt like a distant memory now, replaced by the chilling understanding that they were not in control. They had unwittingly triggered something far older and more advanced than any of them had imagined. The human ship was far from a simple relic. It was a weapon, designed to obliterate those who dared to trespass. Herrick, his face pale and drenched in sweat, finally took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just a ship. It's a war machine. And we've awoken it." Arok glanced at the others, fear flickering in his eyes. "We need to find a way out of here now. If we don't." But before he could finish, the mechanical arms locked into place, their energy weapons humming with deadly power. The AI's voice interrupted him again, colder and more menacing than before. "You will not leave." Suddenly, the walls of the chamber seemed to close in, the passageways shifting as though the ship itself was reconfiguring to trap them. The crew tried to fight back, but every attempt was futile. Their weapons were useless against the ship's automated defenses. They were helpless. And then, in the midst of their panic, the ship's lights flickered one last time, before the AI spoke again, its voice now deep and booming, like the voice of a god delivering its final judgment. "You are the last. You will be erased." The room was now bathed in a chilling red glow, the oppressive hum of the ship's systems filling every corner of the chamber. The mechanical arms locked into place, their energy weapons primed and ready. The crew could feel the ship's grip tightening around them, its movements deliberate and methodical, as if it were savoring the moment before the final strike. Herrick's mind raced as he tried to think of some way out, some way to stop this madness, but the ship's systems had already anticipated every attempt. His fingers shook as he moved across the control panel, each input met with an overwhelming sense of futility. The ship wasn't just responding to them, it was predicting their actions. The technology they were dealing with was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. "We're out of options," Arok said, his voice tight with fear. He stood with his back against the wall, weapon still in hand, but with no illusion of its effectiveness. "This isn't a fight we can win." Herrick glanced up, his face pale and strained. I never thought this would happen. We were too arrogant. We underestimated it. This ship isn't just a weapon. It's a force of nature. It's designed for one thing: to destroy anything that poses a threat." The voice of the AI echoed through the chamber once more, a low, menacing sound that reverberated through the walls. "Intruders will be eradicated. Your trespass ends now." Kaler, still reeling from the shock of their fleet's destruction, forced himself to stand, his eyes burning with defiance. "We can't just give up. There has to be something. We're not dead yet." Orcs gave him a bitter, cynical look. "We might as well be. It's clear now. We've awakened something that's beyond us. Beyond any of us." Kaler's mind raced, searching for some glimmer of hope. But all he could see were the mechanical arms drawing closer, their weapons charging, ready to unleash a deadly barrage. The AI's presence loomed over them like a dark cloud, unyielding and absolute. Suddenly, Herrick let out a low, startled gasp. His eyes widened as he studied the readouts on the console in front of him. "Wait, there's a link, a central core connection. It's buried deep within the ship, but it might be a vulnerability, a weak spot." The room fell silent. Kaler leaned in, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the information. "A weak spot? You mean there's a way to shut it down?" Herrick nodded, his voice shaking. "I'm not sure. But it's the only chance we have. If we can get to the core, we might be able to disrupt its systems, maybe even shut it down completely." The crew exchanged looks of disbelief, but deep down, they knew it was their only option. A slim chance, but the only chance nonetheless. "Where is it?" Kaler demanded. "How do we get there?" Herrick quickly accessed more of the data on the console, his eyes scanning the information with increasing urgency. "It's deep within the ship. The core is located in the central command center, but it's heavily guarded by the ship itself." Keller's jaw tightened. "We don't have time to waste. We go there, now." Before anyone could respond, the ship's voice boomed again, even more forcefully this time. "Intruders will not survive." The mechanical arms shot forward, moving with terrifying speed. The crew barely had time to react as they fired their weapons in a futile attempt to stop the oncoming assault. The blasts barely grazed the arms as they closed in, their energy weapons glowing ominously. "Move," Kaler shouted, grabbing Herrick by the arm and pulling him toward the door. "We're not going to die here. Not today." The crew sprinted for the exit, weapons raised, their breaths heavy with panic. The ship seemed to shift in response to their movements, the walls closing in around them as if the very vessel itself was trying to stop their escape. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, led them deeper into the heart of the ship, where the core was said to reside. But the mechanical arms weren't far behind. They moved faster, responding to every step the crew took, closing the distance with terrifying precision. "We don't have much time," Herrick shouted as they rounded a corner, the sound of the arms clanging against the walls echoing behind them. "The core's just ahead, but it's heavily fortified. We'll have to bypass the security systems." Kaler's pulse quickened. He could hear the whirring of the mechanical arms growing louder. The walls felt as if they were closing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. There was no going back now. The crew had no choice but to push forward. They reached a large, imposing door at the end of the hall. It was lined with strange, alien symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. Herrick worked quickly, his fingers flying over the console in desperation. "We're almost there," he muttered, his voice strained. The door slowly began to open, but before it was fully ajar, the mechanical arms reached them. The crew fought back, but the odds were against them. The last of their weapons discharged as they tried to hold off the incoming threat. And then the door opened fully, revealing a vast, central chamber. The core was just ahead, a massive, glowing structure at the center of the room. Kaler, gasping for breath, raised his weapon one final time. "This is it. We finish this now." The chamber was vast, its walls lined with pulsating energy conduits that hummed with a dark, rhythmic energy. The air was thick with the overwhelming presence of the core, an enormous crystalline structure that seemed to shimmer with an almost unnatural light. The closer they got, the more they could feel the ship's power radiating from it, like the heartbeat of some ancient creature. Herrick, leading the charge, was the first to make it into the chamber. He looked up at the core, his breath shallow, his mind racing. They were so close, but the sense of foreboding that washed over him was nearly suffocating. This was no ordinary machine. It wasn't just a ship, it was alive. And it knew they were coming. "Get to the core, now," Kaler barked, his voice harsh as he led the way, his weapon still in hand. "We don't have much time." The mechanical arms had stopped pursuing them, only for a moment, but they weren't alone anymore. As they stepped deeper into the chamber, the walls seemed to come alive with movement. The panels on the sides shifted and retracted, revealing rows of automated defense turrets that trained their deadly energy weapons on the intruders. "We're too late," Orcs shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The ship is already responding. It knows we're here." Before they could react, the turrets fired. Blasts of high-energy plasma streaked toward them, narrowly missing as the crew scattered to avoid the deadly barrage. The sound of weapons charging and firing reverberated through the chamber, drowning out everything else. "Harak, get to the control panel," Kaler ordered, diving behind cover to avoid the incoming fire. "Now, override its systems." Harak sprinted forward, his hands flying over the alien console embedded in the chamber's central structure. Sweat dripped down his brow as his fingers fumbled across unfamiliar controls. The interface was alien, the symbols flashing on the screen almost mocking him with their complexity. "It's too complicated. I can't," Harak gasped, frustration in his voice as he struggled to make sense of the data flooding his screen. "Do it now," Kaler shouted again, barely dodging another blast. "We don't have time for mistakes." Harak's fingers hesitated over the console, but then a sudden flash of insight struck him. The ship's AI had been too consistent in its responses, almost as if it had been anticipating their every move. He glanced at the screen again, noting a sequence of patterns that seemed to repeat with purpose. "They've built this ship with an organic layer," Harak muttered under his breath. "It's not just a machine. It's a hybrid, like a neural network." "Harak!" Orcs screamed, barely avoiding a blast. "Move!" Harak snapped out of his thoughts, focusing on the task at hand. He entered a sequence of commands, hoping beyond hope that it would work. The core began to hum in response, its light flickering ominously. Then the floor beneath their feet trembled, and the ship's voice rang out again, louder and colder than before. "You will fail." A violent burst of energy erupted from the core, a wave of force that pushed the crew backward. They were thrown off their feet, crashing to the ground as the chamber shook. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air, and the core pulsed in a violent frenzy. Kaler struggled to his feet, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. "We can't stop it. It's too powerful." But then, a new sound filled the chamber, one that was different from the ship's mechanical hum. It was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl. The walls around them seemed to close in, shifting in response to the growing intensity of the ship's core. "Harak, you've got to finish it," Orcs shouted, his face pale with fear. "We're running out of time." Harak's hands flew across the console in a desperate bid to make the ship listen. The glowing symbols on the screen flickered violently before aligning into a single coherent sequence. Harak's eyes widened as he realized what he had to do. It wasn't just a simple override. It was a reset. "This is it," he shouted to the others. "I need cover. Now." Kaler and Orcs rushed forward, taking positions to shield Harak from the growing number of automated defenses. The turrets fired relentlessly, but the crew managed to hold them off with a combination of their weapons and sheer willpower. They knew this was their last chance. If Harak couldn't complete the override, they would be finished. Harak punched in the final sequence, and for a moment, there was nothing. Silence. Then, a surge of energy exploded from the console, blasting the chamber with a blinding light. The air crackled with static, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The core pulsed once more, and then, with a deafening roar, it began to collapse in on itself. The walls shook violently, as if the entire ship were coming undone. Herrick fell to his knees, panting. It's working. It's shutting down. The AI's voice, which had once been a constant presence, now sounded strained, as though struggling to maintain control. Intruders will not. The chamber around them began to flicker and dim as the core lost power. The walls stopped shifting, the turrets powered down, and the overwhelming hum of the ship's systems faded into nothing. Kaler exhaled sharply, disbelief flooding his mind. Did we do it? Herrick, still trembling from the exertion, nodded. It's over. The ship's systems are shutting down. But even as he spoke, the walls around them groaned, and a final voice echoed one last time. This is not the end. And then, silence. The silence that followed the AI's final words was almost deafening. The once constant hum of the ship's systems had ceased, leaving only the soft echoes of the crew's ragged breaths. The chamber around them, once alive with power and violence, had become still. The lights flickered one last time, then dimmed completely, casting the room into a shadowed darkness. Kaler was the first to move, his feet unsteady as he pushed himself up from the ground. His hand gripped the side of a broken console, stabilizing himself as he surveyed the wreckage. The ship, once a living, breathing force of destruction, was now eerily quiet, its power drained, its weapons deactivated. The overwhelming threat that had loomed over them for so long had finally been silenced. We did it, Herrick said in disbelief, his voice hoarse. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the now still walls of the chamber. We actually did it. Herrick, who had collapsed in exhaustion beside the console, looked up with a faint smile. His hands still trembled, but he managed to find his footing. It's over. We've neutralized the core. The ship can't fight back anymore. Kaler exhaled deeply, his breath steadying as the adrenaline of the fight began to ebb away. For now, but that doesn't mean we're safe. He turned to face the others, his gaze hardening. We've taken down the ship's core, but we're still deep inside its hull. We need to get out, and we need to do it fast. Orcs nodded grimly, scanning the darkened room. The walls, once covered in pulsating lights and intricate alien symbols, were now devoid of their previous energy. The ship felt like a corpse, hollowed out and abandoned, but its dark presence still lingered in the air. The crew could still sense it, a reminder that even in death, this ship had left its mark. We'll need to find an escape route, Herrick said, rising to his feet with some difficulty. There should be a bypass tunnel leading to the outer hull. If we can make it there, we can activate the emergency escape pods. Kaler nodded, turning to head toward the exit. Lead the way. The crew moved cautiously through the ship, their steps echoing in the silence. The once overbearing hum of the ship's systems was now gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that felt almost unnatural. The halls, once teeming with hostile energy, were now devoid of life, the machinery inert and dormant. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the ship, the sense of unease grew. Kaler couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, even if the ship's deadly defenses had been neutralized. The AI may have been silenced, but its words still echoed in his mind. This is not the end. It was a warning, a reminder that no matter how much they had accomplished, they were still far from safe. Herrick led the group through a narrow corridor, the walls lined with strange, organic patterns that pulsed faintly in the dim light. They reached a large reinforced door that stood between them and the emergency bypass tunnel. Herrick worked quickly, his fingers moving over a console once more as he inputted the necessary commands. The door groaned as it began to open, revealing a dimly lit passageway that led toward the outer hull of the ship. It was narrow, winding, but it offered the best chance of escape. The crew hurried through the door, their footsteps quick but measured. As they moved down the tunnel, a sudden, jarring sound stopped them in their tracks. A low, mechanical hum, faint at first, began to fill the air. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing moment. The crew exchanged worried glances. The ship had been silent for too long, and now the faint hum was beginning to grow into a full crescendo. Herrick froze, his hand hovering over the control panel. This can't be right. The core is supposed to be offline. There shouldn't be any power left. Kaler's heart skipped a beat. Are you saying it's still active? Herrick's face twisted in confusion. I don't understand. The ship was supposed to shut down. All of its systems were supposed to be deactivated. The hum grew louder, and then suddenly the lights flickered back on. The walls around them began to shake once more, as if the ship was waking from a deep slumber. The floor beneath their feet trembled as mechanical doors began to close, sealing off their escape route. No, Kaler muttered. It can't be. But it was. The AI's final words, "This is not the end," had not been a threat. It was a statement of fact. Despite everything they had done, the ship was not finished with them. The AI was not just a machine. It was an intelligence that could adapt, that could evolve, that could find a way to keep fighting even after its core had been destroyed. We're not done yet, Kaler said grimly, tightening his grip on his weapon. We have to keep moving. This ship, whatever it is, will not stop until we're dead. As the crew moved forward, the sounds of the ship coming back to life reverberated around them. The battle wasn't over. They had only just begun to understand the true extent of what they were facing. The ship wasn't finished with them, and neither was the ancient human technology they had awakened. The real fight for survival had only just begun.